Good evening. I'm Natalie Christ with my co-host Christopher Balzano. This is Tripping on Legends.
Episode 2.
Right. Episode 2.
Episode 2.
Welcome back, everyone.
Episode 1 went up last week.
With a great response, right?
With a great response. I think that people kind of enjoyed it. And
They did.
we're still waiting for it to pop up on iTunes. But you can get episode 1 on the YouTube. So if you go to Tripping on Legends, just go to Facebook and type in Tripping on Legends. We don't have 100 followers yet, so we don't get a special name.
Almost there. Every day there's more and more people that
There
are.
are, and
when
we get to 100, it will be, YouTube / Tripping on Legends. But for now, it's a whole bunch of combinations of numbers and letters, and so it's easier just to go there and to type in Tripping on Legends. And when you see the zombie or the creepy woods picture, that's us.
That's us.
That's us.
Or if you're a Spooky Crew fan like we are, you can find it on their page as well. A big thanks goes out to the whole Spooky Crew for the shout out and having Chris on Saturday night. That was great.
Yep. So if you go to YouTube / Spooky South Coast, we're actually going to be putting our videos up there. And when you're not watching our videos, if there's anyone out there who's listening to this who's not a Spooky South Coast fan, you can catch up on some of the old episodes of that show as well.
It was a really great show this past Saturday too.
Yeah, it was. It was interesting. They asked me to come on. I was a little, for those people who don't know, I'm the content director for that show. I like to do things behind the scenes there. And they like to have me on air, but I always get very nervous because it's not this kind of format. It's, me with Tim Weisberg shooting me very insightful questions or asking me to ask very insightful questions of the guests.
You do a pretty good job. I've listened
Thank you.
Quite
But
a few of them.
it's nowhere near as laid back as this one is.
Right.
So it's a lot harder for me to. I can't do what Tim does. I'm not as good of an interviewer as Tim. So
I think it's because he's got a really big microphone that he pulls down. I think that's what it is.
I know. My microphone is nowhere near as big. I don't even have a microphone at this point. And so, but the other thing I notice when I'm doing those is that I tend to do it as if I'm writing an essay for my 7th grade language arts class. So he'll ask me a question, then I'll give an answer, and then I'll support my answer, and then I'll repeat my answer at the end. Which I'm not sure if anyone ever notices that.
No, I've never noticed that.
But
before,
I always tend to do that.
To.
I say, so what do you think the most interesting thing about the Bridgewater Triangle is? I think it definitely has to be the puckwudgies. And they'll go off for 5 minutes, and I'm saying, so the puckwudgies are the most interesting thing. I've restated my thesis or my claim.
Your 7th graders are so
and brought
proud.
it back around. Yes. See, it's an effective way to communicate.
It is. This was a big week for us, though. We put that first episode out there, and again, got a good response. And now we're on to the next big thing.
We're on to the next big thing. So we started, we put the episode up on YouTube. We started a Facebook page. So anyone can search for Tripping on Legends on Facebook. They're going to find it there, and they can follow us. And, we're treating that not only as where we're putting the episodes, or where we're putting the updates that are coming from the website, trippingonlegends.wordpress.com, but also as a place to post interesting stories that we find that might have to do with, if not directly the Legends Project, then the things that are just interesting urban legends or interesting legends. Like we just posted one from Australia a few minutes ago.
And earlier you posted one about Krampus.
I posted one about Krampus. I'm obsessed with Krampus. So
well, it's
this
time
is definitely
of the year.
it
we
is.
should talk about Krampus maybe on a later episode.
I think we should, because there's a lot of things that are very similar to Krampus that are still active in the southern United States and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
So it might be good to do a whole Krampus episode as we get closer to Krampus time.
That's a good idea. Yeah.
Krampus Eve.
Krampus Eve.
With no connection to the absolutely horrible movie that came out a few years ago. It's pretty bad.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So it's best to be avoided. So
okay.
So here's the other thing that we should probably discuss it, because we haven't hit full gear. We're going to talk a little bit about the Legends Project and kind of how we're going about building it.
Right.
And I've been hashtagging things, Legends Project, for a few years now. And I want to ask you, so I'll have documented proof of your answer here. Okay?
Oh boy.
All right. So I'm thinking that instead of Legends Project or the Legends Project, it should be the Folklore Project. And I think we're early enough in the that if we wanted to switch it up as we're officially moving things forward, we could do that. 'Cause
I think Legends Project rolls off the tongue better than Folklore Project.
the Folklore Project,
I
yeah.
do.
Because I think when I initially started, it was the Hero Project.
Oh.
And I
Okay.
was looking for a hero, and my idea was a book that would focus on like an unknown hero that each state like worshipped. You know what I'm saying? Or that
Interesting
fell
concept.
upon, or like had a festival to, much like the Krampus festival, but not nearly
It's
as
not
evil.
really a hero. Yeah, right.
No kids being taken. So that the idea being that, there has to be, like North Dakota might have Paul Bunyan, which is very well known, but who is the Paul Bunyan of Arizona? You know what I'm saying? Who is the Paul Bunyan of California?
Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Arnold
No.
So and my idea was I could find one of those. So that was kind of the beginning of it. And then I started the same idea kind of like with like a legend, that might be a lesser known legend. And then was working on it that way, which is why I picked the first few that I did were states that there's no way that I could actually get to look at them. Like I think they were Iowa, Missouri, and somewhere else were the first states that I did it for, and I got a pretty good response. And so then once again, that was more of legends, right? But I also kind of like the Folklore Project because that's almost kind of more of what we're looking for. I don't know. What do you think?
More than a legend? Well, I guess define what's the difference between a legend and a folklore.
Well,
A tale of folklore as opposed to a legend.
right. So a legend would probably be more of, and a legend, not necessarily an urban legend. Urban legends are almost kind of more like folklore. Folklore tend to have a supernatural or paranormal aspect to it.
I see. Okay.
So, for example, if you take something like Johnny Appleseed, right, or like John Henry, those would be legends, because even though John Henry, had some kind of hyperbolic ability to smash rock, it really was pretty straightforward. Like he was a guy, he worked really hard. He had, went above and beyond.
Don't diminish John Henry.
I'm not. John Henry, I love him.
Okay, so...
You know what I'm saying? So, and then you have kind of like, so that's like a legend might be something that's like that. Then you have kind of like the gray area. So they call it the Legend of Sleepy Hollow, but because there might be, depending on how you analyze that story, there might be more of a paranormal or a supernatural aspect to it.
Yeah.
So if you think, you know the story that I'm referring to, right?
I do,
The
yes.
Headless Horseman. And so if you think Brom Bones killed or freaked Ichabod Crane out, then it's a legend, right? But if you think that there actually might have been some kind of supernatural horseman there, then it would be more folklore.
But isn't that the whole point of it, is you don't know, and that's what it's evolved to, is
Right.
the fact that it could be one or the other, and that is the legend part of it. I mean, that's kind of the basis of our name, Tripping on Legends, because legends, at some point, folklore becomes a legend,
Right.
right? Doesn't it?
Well, I mean, it's legends also tend to be, which kind of fits more in with, they tend to cover a bigger geographical area. Like folklore is much more specific to a very might be a smaller area, which is why I kind of like it as well. Now these are connotations; these aren't necessarily part of like the official dictionary definitions of them.
Right.
But a legend is something that exists in the minds of the people of an area that may or may not be true. Folklore is something that is assumed by the people who hear it to not be true. Right? So however much they want to believe it, there's an element of it that's not.
Okay.
Right?
Gotcha. All
And it's
right.
like mythology is kind of like the next. Mythology was thought to be true by the people who created it.
Okay, so mythology was
So
during its time a legend? I'm just
no,
trying to follow
during
along
its
here.
time, like, no, mythology would be religion.
Well, right.
You know what I'm saying? So religion kind of becomes mythology when people stop believing in it. It's probably the best way. Or if you don't believe in it.
Right.
You know, like I tell my students, if you're not a Christian, then Christian stories are mythology. They're not religion. But if you believe in that, then they're religion.
I see.
So in the same kind of way, folklore is almost more. It's almost kind of like the son of legend and mythology. It's got a lot of the same attributes of legends, but people assume it to be true. Whereas no one really thinks that Paul Bunyan was chopping down entire forests with one swing, right?
Mm-hmm.
People assume, or people might assume that.
Okay, so just to clarify one
Okay.
more time.
Okay.
A little confused.
I know, it's a little
about the
confusing.
big So, if we're going on the basis of folklore instead of a legend, we're assuming, or we're going against an audience or to a town or wherever, a small locale, that assumes that whatever we're investigating is not true. Something that the locals do not believe happened or is occurring or what have you.
Well, and that's kind of like the fine line is that, like, that's not necessarily how people translate their own folklore as something that they don't believe. It's kind of like more of like the Webster's dictionary definition of it.
So can we just like erase the whole either legends or folklore and just combine the two words and make our own, like flegends?
Or ledgelore.
There you go.
Ledgelore.
Ledgelore.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I like the Legends Project because, you know, it is tripping on legends.
It is tripping on legends, right?
You know, and we're actually probably most of what we're going to run into is more urban legend, which has just been adapted to a certain area.
Right.
So,
Right, because it's not, I mean, I haven't really run across too many folklore stories or something that's been categorized as a folklore. It's more so like, this is a legend, this is a local legend in our area.
Right.
Like, so it's a very broad definition of what a legend is.
right, and it gets muddled sometimes to the point. I mean, there are very clear definitions of what is a legend, what is folklore, but I think in the hands of the people that are using it, it's muddled.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? People use the words interchangeably, which is fine for what we're doing because we're not making that distinction.
Right. And I don't think
Unless
we
you think
need
we
to.
should.
Well, we can. I mean, I guess when we run up on something that we find interesting that we want to investigate further, we can kind of sidebar and say, well, this is either we think this is more of a legend categorized or this is more folklore. You know what I mean? So it can be subsection.
That's true. Yeah.
But I think you should stick with what you started. You started hashtagging Legends Project. I think you should stick with Legends Project. It's tripping on legends. It should be that instead of introducing folklore. I mean, that can be a secondary hashtag. There's no saying that you have to stick with only one hashtag.
Right. But in terms of like that brand hashtag, you know?
We might have to start a second podcast where it's like folkloring or tripping on folklore.
Tripping on folklore or tripping on trying to find which one best suits us might be the better idea for it. So
I mean, we're early enough where we can. We can change it at any time. You know, just my opinion, I like the whole Legends Project better than the Folklore Project.
yeah, and the other thing that I thought, which is why the Folklore Project was an appealing name, and this goes to kind of like the first thing that we're really going to talk about today, which is the methodology of what we're doing, is that if I am someone receiving a feeder email from us.
What is a feeder email for us?
So we're going to, I shouldn't say feeder, I meant feeler email.
Okay.
We are starting to try to get information. Okay. So we are moving up the coast and out towards the middle. We're in Florida right now. So we're in Southwest Florida. We're probably 3 hours from the southern tip of Florida, and like 5 hours from
5 or 6 hours to
the Georgia border. So we're kind of in the middle. And we are, as of right now, an hour from Tampa, or 2 hours, from Tampa,
yeah.
2.5 from Miami, 3 from Orlando. So we really are kind of, when you think of Florida and the cities that are there, we're in the middle of them.
We're in the middle.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
We're two from the ones on the other coast, and so we're kind of in this in this southern central place. And so we are going to go up the state to kind of get our chops.
For sure. And we're starting on the west coast of Florida. We haven't even moved over to the east coast, really, have we? I mean,
I've
as
moved a
far as
little bit
research?
central,
Okay.
but not necessarily on the other coast
Okay.
yet.
Right. So I think it's a smart idea to start on the west coast and just see what's out there and start.
Right. So what we're looking for is something that we can get to within 2.5 to 3 hours to, in a lot of ways, practice for the big country, or at least East Coast.
At least East Coast, yeah.
East
I don't know if we'll
Coast
get countrywide.
extension that we can make. So we thought that it would be good over the next couple of months to take some day or double day trips out to some of these locations and kind of find our sea legs, like how we're going to do this and stuff like
Absolutely.
that. So
Get a process down. Get a form. You know what I mean? Like, how are we going to approach things? What are we going to do?
right.
What are we looking for exactly on each one? Like, you know, are we using our senses? Are we going to bring any kind of measuring equipment that you paranormal investigators use? You know, but I think, like you said, that's all about methodology and what we're going to be doing, and that's learning. We're learning. I mean, we're figuring it out now.
And I really liked the idea of the tulpa that we used in the Venice trip because, you know, we found an aspect of the story and we're trying to use that to ignite some actual activity,
Right.
which was the $2 bill. So that's the kind of thing that I'm looking for. So I think each investigation, each trip, I should say, is going to be different because it's going to have some element to it that is either us bringing something or us trying to ignite something
So for
that's
like
there.
the pants, we should bring a belt.
We should definitely bring a belt. I don't know. For the pants story, it sounds like we should probably bring a lot of liquor, but,
Wow.
but we'll talk about that. So the feeler process is, and this is how, like I said, how I started
The initial, right? Yeah.
right the legends and then the heroes and then the legends project was I literally go county by county, city by city, and I send out an email, a feeler email, to the people who I think are the guardians of what we're looking for.
Ooh, good
And
word.
thank you. Gatekeepers probably would have been even better.
Gatekeepers. Ooh.
Okay,
Guardians
so
of the
I
gate.
send out.
Huh?
So I send out a feeler email to the gatekeepers. In this case, to me, and this is different than you would be if you were a paranormal investigator, which is another distinction, like between the two things we're doing. I'm sending out feeler emails to historical societies,
Okay.
to recreational organizations, and to libraries. So libraries are really our bread and butter.
Gotcha. Okay.
And what I'm basically asking is there something in your area that you know of? Like when people were paranormal investigating, like as you're building like your resume, if you want, as like a paranormal investigator, as like a ghost hunter.
Okay.
You go to like all the famously haunted places,
I see.
you know, and then you set up a website and you hope that people start to call you for cases,
I
you
see.
know?
Okay.
And this is very different because this is more of like, we're actually literally going out and saying, what is the creepy thing in your town?
Right.
What is the legend or the
Or the
folklore?
unknown. Yeah. Right. What is the unknown thing in your town? Meaning, like, what is the mystery?
Right.
Maybe not so much creepy because some of it's not creepy. You know, like the vortex. That's not creepy. That's more so mysterious.
Right. Right. And I think the way that I phrased it is, I think I used John Henry in the email.
Did you?
Yes, I do. I say, like, what is your town's John Henry or cursed bridge?
Ooh, good one.
Is I think how I phrased it in terms of like, because, you know, it was initially not something I was looking for scary stuff.
Right.
Because I was actually looking to separate myself from the paranormal. So I've kind of adapted it more so it's
Paranormal
like,
just doesn't want to separate from you.
it doesn't, it keeps pulling me back in. So now, but what I don't want is like, oh, here's a famously haunted building. Because I don't think that really fits into what we're doing. It might be interesting to go visit it, you know, and talk to the people a little bit. But it's really not like, it's much more of kind of the unknown story. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of more of like, well, here's something that's not existed for a few years, but rather than like, well, you know, for decades they've talked about this mysterious thing, or people have seen this.
Right.
And so that's kind of what I've asked those libraries and historical societies for.
Okay.
So it's really it's about sending out dozens and dozens of emails, and most of the people are going to get it and they're going to delete it and they're going to push it off. But what I found, and this was kind of when I was doing it more in the paranormal world, I was the person who was emailing the libraries to say, hey, what's your famous ghost story of your town? Is that when you find a librarian who's interested, they'll send it back to you, and they'll be like your best friend.
Really?
Right?
Huh.
So if you go to, like, for example, if you go to the library in Cape Coral, and you ask them, excuse me, can you help me? Like, they, no matter what it is, like, they just seem like, why do you have to exist in this world? Right? They're like the worst librarians in the world.
You know, I don't think I've only ever met like one really great, nice librarian. They're just notorious for being mean people.
You would think, except for you find that librarian who kind of is attached to the history of the town, you know, is about town pride, is about kind of like the little nooks and crannies that make their community. That's the person who responds to this email, and that's exactly the person we want to talk to. You know, so I didn't even try the Cape Coral libraries or the Lee County, because I've kind of gone through that. I've kind of gone through trying to ask them if there's stuff around this area, and I've generally found them to be non-responsive.
Gotcha.
But if you go up to, like, you know, some obscure town in Florida,
That was gonna be my follow-up question. Do you find that the friendly librarians are from the smaller one-stop light towns, or are they from bigger towns?
I generally find
You know what
that
I
they're
mean?
from the smaller places, because
Yeah.
there's more of a direct connection between the history of a town and its library. You know, so no matter how many times, as an example, no matter how many times I emailed people from the Boston Public Library, I never got any response about any famous haunting.
Wow,
Right?
really?
Or I would get like they would shoot me like a link to something. And link was usually an article that mentioned me. So it wasn't really helpful. But then, for example, I think it was in Newburyport. I can't remember if it was Newburyport or Gloucester. And the librarian was like, come here. I'll even extend the library hours. You can come in and do research. We've got this really
Oh,
amazing
that's
story.
wonderful.
And that's where I got like the story of the haunted schoolhouse.
Oh.
And she pulled out all these resources. She's like, you can't take any of it with you, but once you're here, you can take notes on it. You can photocopy it.
Wow.
And it was like, you know, it was a compared to Boston, it was a much smaller town, smaller atmosphere, and she was much more willing to help. And so that's kind of, and I've had that happen before. Like, I had that happen in several different towns in Massachusetts.
And
So
that may be due to the transient nature of where we live.
right,
Do you know what I mean? To like, people aren't from here.
right,
Rarely.
right.
So they're not really connected to the local history. But whereas you go up the state and you get into your smaller towns, they've probably been born there, you know what I mean, generations.
Right, I was gonna say, like, even in a non-condescending way, the town librarian in, you know, some small town in Tarpon, what is it, Tarpon?
Tarpon Springs.
Tarpon Springs. Chances are that person is in Tarpon Springs. Maybe they have a degree in literature or something like that. They started as a volunteer,
Right.
and they've kind of worked their way up. And as opposed to, if you're looking at, you know, the Boston Public Library, you're looking for someone who has a master's degree in library science, and so there's a detachment to it. Doesn't mean they don't do their job well. Doesn't mean they're not
No.
extremely informed,
Right.
but they're not necessarily, like, don't have their finger on the pulse of the town that they're from or the town that they live in.
Yeah, I would tend to agree, absolutely. Just overall, I think that's probably the overall consensus of ask people too.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Just like if they know their local librarian, most people here don't know their local librarian.
Right.
A small town, they're going to know their local librarian.
Yeah, I
For
mean,
sure.
you know, and that's kind of where I was able to find some of my more obscure stories
That's what we're looking
for
for, is the
making
obscure.
Mass Crossroads.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of like the model that I'm going with now.
For sure.
So,
Okay.
and of course, there's no rush for any of this, because there's no impending book deal or anything like that, or
That's what-
like
I think that's
there's
what's
no
great about it.
pressure. There's no pressure to, you know, wait a minute, how many hits do we get today, or how many
Nope.
people are downloading the story, or whatever. So it's kind of like,
It's totally
all
just
right.
a cool, free journey. You know what I
Right.
mean? So,
And I think that what happens then, it's probably when that librarian hears from you, they say, "Oh, I don't know much, but here's a contact of someone who might know something." You know, and then that person who you contact, okay. So especially back in the day, how we got our ghost stories was, you would go into a room and you would say like, "So, how about ghosts? Who here believes in ghosts?" Or you would tell a ghost story and everyone would be like, "Haha," laugh, or "That's interesting," and then you would walk away. And then one person would come up to you and be like, "Hey, that story you told? It kind of reminded me of this. Like, I don't believe in ghosts, but this happened to me once." That's kind of the same theory, that only we're doing it electronically, I guess, sending the stuff out there, and someone's gonna say like, I've had people respond when I was doing the first Legends project of there's nothing here, but here's this story from Minnesota that we
Gotcha.
all used to believe
Yeah.
in. And all of a sudden, now I had two states going at one time. I had the state I had looked at, and then this one in Minnesota. So
in my opinion, I think it's everybody wants to tell their story. Everybody wants to get a chance to tell their experience. Actually, Spooky South Coast touched on this too on Saturday night too, about how, people even that are skeptical, even if they've had something happen to them or they know something that's happened to somebody else, they want to get that story out there. And I think that by actually making contact, like you did, like, okay, you walk into a room and you make actual verbal contact with somebody, you're initiating a bond, a spark. And I think that's so important, especially in today's day and age, when
Right.
everything is done electronically and you don't really get to know the character of the person. So it might even be good to follow it up with a phone call. You know what I mean?
Well, right, like that's why it's a feeler email, and then the next
Yeah.
part of it's like actually talking to someone, and it's people want to be part of the story,
Absolutely.
and that's part of what makes folklore and local legends what they are, and how they connect to community, is because once you know it, it's almost like an initiation, and to retell it. And usually that retelling is oral, right? That's how
Right.
kind of these were traditionally passed down.
Yeah.
So telling someone like us that story is their way of keeping that community alive, and also proving their own connection to that community.
It's like grandma passing down a secret recipe.
Exactly.
It's keeping it alive.
Exactly. Oh, and everyone says, "Well, why?" So if you have a really good recipe like that, right?
I do.
And you bring it to like a potluck at work, and everyone's like, "What's the recipe?" And you could just give them the A, B's, and C's of the recipe, but no, you have to say like, "Oh, my grandmother used to bring us over on Saturday nights, and we would
Absolutely.
like that's
You've
part of
got
that."
to- exactly. Yeah. Gives it life.
Right, and gives and in that sense, in the deeper sense, I should say, gives life to your grandmother,
Right.
who might have been passed, and so now, like, she is living again in this story via her.
Yep. And that's what we're doing. We're bringing to life these forgotten or obscure stories.
Right.
All right. So after the feeler email, after contact, then what's the next step?
Okay, so let's take for example, because we did get one feeler back this week.
We did.
We did. Technically, we've gotten two feelers back, but one was a different sort, which I'll get into a little bit later. But we heard back from the librarian from the town of Astor.
Astor. Right.
Is it Astor, Florida, or is it Lake Florida?
No, I think it's Astor.
Okay.
Because it was named after John Astor, remember? Because you didn't know who I was talking about. And got it from the Titanic, died at the Titanic, Astor. My name might not be John, I don't remember. But the Astor family, who was a very wealthy family, started this town, or was a huge influence on this town. So it's named Astor, Florida. Yes, I'd never
Okay.
heard of it, though.
I thought it might be named Lake Florida, and the lake is Lake Astor. If only we had something that we could look up information almost instantaneously. Either way,
Hold on, no, I have to fact check. So you keep going. I'm just going to.
this is a town which seems to be maybe like a half hour north of Orlando. It seems to be on the other side of Orlando.
It is Astor, Florida. It's Lake George.
It's Lake George.
Lake
Okay.
George. Lake George.
And it is north of Orlando, right?
Well, now you're asking me to use my smartphone device to look up even more information. You're just going to have to. Yes. So,
Okay.
yes, it is. It is actually closer to. Actually, it's north of Orlando. It's closer to, if people are familiar with Florida geography at all, like Daytona Beach and DeLand, or Deltona, Florida.
Okay.
Mid-state, though.
Mid-state.
You know what I mean?
Mid-state.
Mid
So
to
a
north
good,
state,
a good,
yeah.
for us, a good 2.5 hours to 3 hours to
And
get,
it's like
to
a
get there.
4-hour trip to get to Astor.
Okay, so a good 4-hour trip to get out to Astor. And she responded, and she was very like, I want to help you. I want to help you. And that's just the spirit that we're looking for, right?
Absolutely.
And so she kind of did a few different hauntings that were there. But I emailed her back to be like, I need a little bit more details, because pretty much all you did was just give me, if I wanted to just look up Lake Astor or look up Astor or Lake George, I would have found the same links that she sent.
Right.
I'm looking for the stuff that's in the files, right?
Right.
But I wanted to ask you, because one of the things that they talked about was a lake monster.
Ooh.
And I wanted to know how you felt about
Like a Florida
dipping,
Nessie.
like a Florida net. That's exactly the terminology they used.
Wow.
And so, how do you feel about that kind of supernatural, paranormal, depending on your definitions?
I don't know if I would call it paranormal, more so supernatural.
Okay,
I
I mean,
think.
we could just call it crypto. Or
We could,
crypto or
absolutely,
cryptozoology.
yes.
So
Actual good definition.
cryptozoological, if you want to get really fancy.
Ooh, wait. Sound that out for me.
Cryptozoological.
Zoological. Okay.
It's spelled exactly how it sounds.
It
It's actually a
sounds
really
like, yeah.
easy word.
Do you want me to spell it? Because I can
Absolutely
probably do
not,
it. Okay.
because that'll embarrass me. Because I can't spell it.
I think that's a fantastic lead. I would love to go check that out for sure.
So you would follow up a cryptid story.
Absolutely.
Okay, so
Yeah.
where would you draw the line on a cryptid story?
What do you mean?
Okay, so cryptozoology is a study of like hidden animals or hidden beasts that may or may not be, they may or may not be real, or they may just be unclassified, or so that's more of like Bigfoot. It's more of like our good friends the Pukwudgies in some people's opinion. Lake monsters.
So you're asking me where I would draw the line, like as
Yeah,
far as
like,
what
are those-
kind of cryptid?
Yeah,
I would
like
draw
is
the
that
line?
is there? Do you have an interest in that kind of?
I do.
Because I've never asked you that before.
No,
I know that
we've
you have an
never
interest
really talked
in.
about that before. Absolutely. I mean, I've never went and chased Bigfoot or the swamp ape. That's our
Skunk ape.
Skunk ape. That's what I meant.
Yeah.
I've never actually went and tried to research or find any clues or gone on an adventure to see anything. But it's definitely of interest for sure.
Do you think that falls into what we're doing?
Absolutely.
Like a monster like that?
Absolutely. Why wouldn't it? It's folklore and local legend, depending. You know what I mean?
Right, right.
I think it's absolutely.
So this one seems, I think it might even be called Georgie, like Nessie.
Oh, how cute! Did she give you a description of what it is supposed to look like? How long
Yep,
it's been
there's
around?
a description in there. I mean, it's pretty much just a very standard. It's been cited for 100 years, and then, you know, there was a link to an article, and I think it even went to the link to Cryptomundo. There was a link to Cryptomundo on it because
I don't know,
Lauren.
like Calimundo? What is Cryptomundo?
Cryptomundo is the website of Lauren Coleman.
Oh, okay. We've talked about Lauren Coleman before.
So, because they actually mentioned that Lauren Coleman had come down to investigate, I think within the last 5 years, of whether or not this lake monster was real.
So how I would start it, I mean, I would definitely go and do some more research, see who else has seen it, just do a couple of like local searches, you know what I mean, and like different forums, see what people are saying about it, see if there's any locals that have seen it, you know, things like that. I think it would be cool to take a day trip up there and talk to people about it, you know, actually maybe go to the lake, go on a boat, see what we see. I think it's definitely worth checking out.
Yeah, and I think that it would be interesting to interview the people who have seen it, and also the people who have been impacted by it.
For sure.
So that's even, and that's kind of the difference
Is
between
Georgie
these two.
nice or is Georgie mean?
There didn't seem to be anything there that it was like jumping out of the water and killing people.
Okay. It hasn't like taken small children into the lake and.
No, but we can only hope that it does, because then we can bring small children, and that'll be our kind of spot. Like, we'll sacrifice them to the lake monster. No, I would never do that.
With your own children.
With my own children, but it might be a case where I'm hosting Saturday school, and I just say, field trip, and take a school bus full of the bad kids from my school out to Lake. We're going
It's
to
not
visit
really
a lake.
this dark. This is no.
So that was the first one that we came across, we got a response from.
Okay. Wait, so what is your opinion on cryptozoology?
I mean, I think, once again, if we're approaching it from the story aspect of it and how it's impacting the community, then it's interesting to me.
Okay.
I've always kind of not been interested in cryptids.
Budgies or cryptids?
Well, I would argue with you that they are not
Really?
cryptids.
But they're animal, aren't they? Like half
I don't
animal, half
think so. I think
sheep?
we're talking much more, and this is a much bigger discussion of what is a pukwudgie.
Okay.
But to me, a
next time.
pukwudgie is not like an unclassified, beast. It is an elemental who can take like an actual form or a corporeal form, if you want to get like fancy. So I think it's much more into the realm of like I've always referred to it as a leprechaun or like a fairy or something like that.
Will-o'-the-wisp.
Well, no, those would be the Taipei-wonkas, which are the lights
All
that
right,
are
so
associated
that's
with
a different
pukwudgies.
conversation for
So,
a different night. So wait, you say how it impacts, how like a cryptid would impact the community. What do you mean by that? Like if it terrifies people, if it's something that people celebrate?
Yeah, I mean, especially that celebrating part of it. Like if it's some place where there has been a business that's developed around the monster.
Is that really even a legend trip though at that point, or is that more in anthropological? You know what I mean?
I would argue that that's what the legend trip is. It's kind of, we're looking to touch the paranormal part of it, but we're also looking to how does this existence impact the people who know about it. So for me, it's going to take, like, for example, Bloody Mary, right? So if people are doing Bloody Mary, I really have no sense that someone's going to come out and kill that person.
Right.
Okay? But the fact that people have been doing it for 70 years now, and how it bonds different generations in different ways, and how what they say into the mirror changes, that's the interesting part to me. So I would totally then go to a mirror and say Bloody Mary, but I don't necessarily think anything's going to happen. But I'm really intrigued by the way that the people interact with that story.
Okay, so let's bring it down to, like, let's say Georgie. Let's say we go and experience the town of Astor and all that it has to offer. And we go and we talk to locals, their opinions on Georgie, if that is Lake Monster's name.
Yeah.
And then where do we go from there? After we interview people, what?
Well, I would try to, we would try to figure out, like, what would be the best time to try to spot him or something like that. See, that's also one of the reasons why, for cryptids, I'm kind of hesitant to include them in the project myself, because it's like, all right, now what do I do? Like, go out and look for it? Like, question mark? Like, how do you exactly follow up with that? Like, for something else, so like for the traveling pants, right? Which we're going to talk about. Although it's not the traveling pants, we should probably name it something different.
Pants. It's not like Sisterhood.
So, okay, or to take it back to the Venice trip, right? So in the Venice trip, there was a very specific time, a very specific place that we could go there.
Right.
And that was part of the legend, was the time and the place.
But again, so wait, just backing up, and I hate to interrupt, but that really didn't affect the community. We didn't really have an opportunity to, well, I guess you did the year before, talk to people.
Right.
So I came in late into it. So, I mean, I really didn't experience, I really guess that wasn't my first.
A day late and
true
$2
trip.
short.
Right?
Yes.
So, I mean, I guess was that part of it, though? Was that part of the pull to that for you? was wondering if this legend that was this obscure thing that you'd heard about,
Right.
had it affected the people around in that community?
Yeah, I mean, and sometimes it won't, but that's the thing that kind of pulls me sometimes.
Is whether or not it does, and whether are you looking?
Yeah, and that
maybe
might be a group of people, or it might be the whole community. It might be just a small portion of the community, but people that embrace the story. You know what I'm
Are
saying?
you hoping to inspire people to, I guess, the local people that maybe it doesn't affect? Are you hoping that it, by you bringing it up and going and researching, are you hoping that it kind of ignites that within the town?
I think so.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I would want that too. So if you take a place like Rehoboth, Massachusetts, so when I first started doing paranormal stories, like my first legend trip, I wouldn't even call it an investigation, was out to Rehoboth, Massachusetts, because we had read so much about the town in this book called The New England Ghost Files. And so we were like, well, this was on Halloween, 1999, I believe, we could hit like 7 of these locations in one night. And when we got there, we found that people were very eager to talk about the stories and that they had heard the stories. Oh, yeah, the most famous being, the redhead hitchhiker or the redheaded phantom, depending on how you look at it.
Okay.
Or, at what phase you pop into the story. And they were like, oh, yeah, we've heard that story. And then they like, oh, my cousins. And that's when all of a sudden they started to tell you the things. And so Rehoboth, since the publication of that book, for a while, I think it's changed now from what I understand, we're really embracing this idea of being this haunted town.
I see.
And it started to almost change the complexion of the town because people were coming there specifically to go to one of these 5 or 6 very haunted locations.
So are businesses popping up because of it? So is it stimulating the economy, becoming this?
I'm not sure.
hotspot?
I'm not sure. It would,
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm not sure it would be that. It was that much.
Okay.
But it was definitely changing the town's idea of itself, to the point where you couldn't go anywhere and find someone that didn't know or couldn't rattle off the 7 or 8 haunted locations that were there.
Wow. Cool.
And so there was kind of an embrace. From what I understand, they seem to now kind of be annoyed. Like it got to that saturation point where people were
Yeah.
looking for these things so much that it kind of, it dipped, and kind of almost had the reverse perspective. But definitely, for a while there, they were like, yes, we are one of the most haunted towns in Massachusetts. Come see our Horribine school. And that's an example of like a town embracing the legends that were
Okay.
so, making it up, or
So
that were
back to
contained in it.
Aster really quick. The librarian, after she told you about the lake monster or the lake creature, whatever it is, did she say whether or not this is something that's widely known or this is a pretty obscure, hasn't been seen in 100 years? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Did she give you detail?
She didn't. She didn't give me that kind of details. But as soon as she sent the first email, I looked up the town. And I found all the resources that she then sent me in her next email.
Gotcha.
So they're ones that are out there. It's not like she was like digging deep into this stuff.
Okay.
So what I'm hoping is then my next email to her was, do you have resources on this in the library? Like what are the what's the real lowdown on what's going on with these? And so I'm hoping to get some feedback on that, because then that becomes what those other places don't have.
Gotcha.
Or maybe, following, and this is like when I contacted Kim Cool, I didn't say, I said, tell me your version of the story, but where did you find this information? Let me go then ask the people, let me follow in the footsteps of what you did. And maybe that's what turned her off, because maybe she was thinking that I was saying she wasn't a good researcher.
Right.
But I was doing the exact opposite. I was like, no, you're great. I want to go where the primary source is. So that's the next thing that we would do, is if we got these stories, if they mention 3 or 4 different books that are in there, we want to go to those books and get the story for ourselves. Or if they mention someone who's interviewed, we want to try to interview that same person, but do it in our style. And of course, get the audio and hopefully the video of that as well.
Okay. Cool.
So that was the first blip we got.
Gotcha. So, I mean, it's really going to be documenting a lot of what the research that goes into it, and then actually going and experiencing whatever it is.
Right.
I'm down to go look at a lake monster for sure, or try and find the lake monster, or at least get the lake monster story. Like, where did it come from?
Right.
What was the first known recorded account? You know,
I think that's the interesting part
Yeah,
of
that's
it.
my interesting part, for
Where's
sure.
where does the account come from? How far back does it go? Things like that.
Right.
It's just like in the past, I think it's just been very difficult to, you can prevailing thought, right? If a ghost is in a house, chances are the ghost is always in the house. Whether that's true or not, push that to the side. But that's kind of one of the prevailing things. So you can go into some place that's haunted, and you can very specifically look for evidence.
Right.
That becomes a lot harder when you're like, I'm going to go into this really large wooded area or the Everglades to look for a skunk ape, and I might never see him because he's been seen 5 times in the last 20 years, as opposed to these people are calling saying that this ghost is upsetting their house on a daily basis.
But that's okay, because we're not looking for concrete evidence one way or the other. We're just looking to experience the then and the now. You know what I mean? The what it is.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, that's always been my kind of like arm's length thing with the cryptids, is that it's really hard to follow up on those. And the same thing with the aliens. Like, there's a fascinating part of aliens to me, but like, there are people who dedicate their whole lives to going to one place that an alien has been to multiple times, like over the course of years, trying to touch what one person might have touched and experienced there. I think there's less of that in the paranormal. I think it's more like it might be more of a building that is notoriously haunted that people go to, as opposed to like, you're gonna get nothing for years and years and years, because this is something that happened once in one location, So that's kind of always why I've been interested in those things, but never really truly interested in like looking into them.
But now it's different. We're not doing what you've done in the past. Now we're just going based on the stories,
right?
And going for that one-time experience. We're not hunting.
That's why I'm pro George.
Okay, cool. You're pro George.
Pro George.
Kind of what I was hoping to draw out of you was that you're pro Georgie.
Yes, I am pro George.
Okay, so let's back up for just a minute. What is it about the human connection to these stories, or the emotional connection to these stories, that draws you? What is it that you like about that? What do you want to explore with that?
I think that every location, every community has its own need to connect, and has its own interpretation of whatever it is that is unseen in that community.
Okay.
Right? So I'm going to use the Pukwudgie as an example.
Okay.
So the Pukwudgie is a great reflection of something that might be real, something that might be impactful, that might be a physical being that's there, or a supernatural being that's there, that is filtered through the eyes of the Wampanoags who first wrote about it. Okay? So that same creature, in my opinion, exists throughout the world, right? And so different cultures have labeled it different things and put different attributes to it. Okay, so imagine that someone experiences something, and over time, kind of the root of what that was changes based on the community's need for it.
I see what you're saying.
Okay,
yeah.
So, and also like what makes up that community, what is that community's personality, gets imprinted on the story, and then it becomes more about that community than it is about the actual thing. If that makes sense.
It does.
So you can look at the Irish leprechaun, like I was mentioning earlier, is very similar. Like the original leprechaun, not like the nice, cute one that we now have,
Right.
but like the original leprechaun, yes, is very much like a Pukwudgie in the way that it acts and the way that it interacts, and even the way a lot of the physical attributes of it. But its behavior and its meaning and what it's doing there changes between the people who are experiencing it centuries ago with the Irish and people who are experiencing it centuries ago with the Wampanoag. And so if you kind of extrapolate that out, right? So if we look, so the way that, if we look at George, for example, the way that,
Wait, because I'm going to interrupt you for just 1 second, just to keep your thought process going.
okay,
There's nowhere written, right, that Georgie could be a supernatural being. It could be their version of a Pukwudgie. Georgie could be their supernatural being. Just saying.
okay, but I think it doesn't look, I think it looks much more like a Nessie or like a Champ than it does.
But Pukwudgies can shape shift, right?
Shapeshift, sure.
Take
Sure.
on whatever image they want to.
Right.
So let's see if Georgie's mysterious or like mischievous, like I'm just saying. I'm pro Georgie. So.
Okay, yes, you are. Get off the Georgie. Stop trying to make George happen. And so if you look, what is the difference between like those three things that I just mentioned, okay? Between George and Champ and Nessie. And what you're going to find is the differences between them could be a reflection of the three different communities that they inhabit.
Okay.
Right? So it is the community's need to understand the unexplained, which oftentimes puts the backstory in there. And the backstory to me is what the interesting part is.
I see.
Right? So that redheaded hitchhiker, no one knows who he is.
Right.
But all this backstory has kind of evolved about him based on Rehoboth's need for certain
So
things.
the pull is to find out how their collective consciousness, whatever that community's collective consciousness has turned this into, what it has turned the story into, what they've developed is their way of explaining the unexplained.
Right, exactly. So if,
That's okay.
so even if you look at something like, Five Nights at Freddy's, right?
I don't know what it is.
Which is, it's a genuinely created urban legend, manufactured urban legend, which is pretty much, imagine if Chuck E. Cheese meets, hell.
Oh God.
You know what I'm saying? So these
That's pretty
Chuck E. Cheese,
terrifying.
these Chuck E. Cheese animated creatures
Ooh.
turn evil, right?
Gotcha.
Well, that story is really nothing more than Chucky back in the day. Not Chuck E. Cheese, but Chucky, from like Child's Play. Or if you even want to go out further, it's really nothing more than a retelling of Frankenstein. Which is a retelling of, which is a retelling of, which is a retelling of. And so each of those stories is a reflection. So, if you hear the story of Five Nights at Freddy's, it's whatever, right? But when my kids hear it, it's genuinely frightening because it's relating to them. It's that same story of the thing that we create going crazy, but it's made for them.
Oh,
Right?
Yeah.
So if you ask my kids, for example, and I'm going to get his name wrong, but my kids this week have been obsessed with this character named Hero Brian, who is a Minecraft character.
Okay.
Right? And the thing is that he has this supernatural element to him, to my kids, because they've been told that he can jump into any Minecraft game. And that he has gone beyond the programming of any single person. And so they could be playing Minecraft in their own world, in their room, and he can enter, even though that's 100%. And I was able to show them articles that that's not true, that it's very specific worlds that he's in. He's not associated with Minecraft at all. He's literally like the invention of a few people, and you need to go into their worlds to experience it. But my kids still fear that, right? Well, that's something that's totally, in our minds, would be like, well, that doesn't make, okay. But my kids are so obsessed with Minecraft in that world that idea of something coming into their world electronically is like their version of folklore. It's their version of urban legend.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So, and that, once again, if you look at it, is not a reflection of Minecraft. It's a reflection of my kids. It's a reflection of my kids' generation. It's a reflection of, if you look at something like Slender Man has existed time and time again in all this different kind. I was tracking it when I was working on my Slender Man book. I was able to, like I'm looking at fairy tales being like, yep, there's an element of Slender Man. There's another element. Up, look at this old grim fairy tale. That's pretty much Slender Man in there. Take that, but
mutate it to
what
to relate
this
to
generation needs. You know what I'm saying? And the story changes. And that's why that character has been able to become so popular and then so influential, because he was specifically, as Slender Man, designed to do that, designed to tap into what are the fears and what are the anxieties of this generation.
Interesting. So what about the cases that you can't track the origins of, though? Those have got to be extremely frustrating, to not be able to track the changes or how they.
So then what you do is you take two stories from two different locations, and you look at what's similar and what's different, right? So there are, like we mentioned, the Headless Horseman. There are stories of ghostly riders all over the place. And each of them is a reflection of the time and the place that they happened in. So if you look at, once again, I know I'm mentioning things that we've talked about, but that's because I'm trying to connect them all. If you look like the Venice train, right? That Venice train is a reflection of like a time gone by when Ringling had this huge influence in the town, when the town was alive because of that. That's where there might be a need for that legend. And then you take another ghostly train, like let's say Lincoln's ghostly train. Well, and that was a way of connecting to his spirit after death. Right, and that grief that they had, and that need that they had, sparked on probably by Walt Whitman's poetry about the importance of this train carrying the captain, and that kind of thing. And so those are two ghostly trains, and there's a lot of similarities between those two stories, but their need, the need that they fulfill for those two different cultures at the times that they're kind of snapshotted. Is very different.
So it's going to be more so how the legends or folklore were created, what the backstory is,
right.
What the backstory truly is, not just the story itself, but the elemental basics of each and every legend.
Yeah, cool. I mean, and so, and if you guys, I'm not quite sure I can't remember what the Spooky South Coast episode was, but we were talking about the Lady of the Ledge. Who is it's a story of someone who jumps from the Asonnet Ledge, is seen kind of haunting the Asonnet Ledge and is sometimes seen jumping.
Ledge, just quickly?
It's a haunted location inside the Bridgewater Triangle in Freetown.
Okay.
That you can read more about in the book Dark Woods by Christopher Balzano. Or if you go to YouTube and you type in "When Puckwudgies Attack," you can see kind of the famous video that we shot in that location. Of a woman being possessed, maybe. But, so, traditionally, and this was even before I came on the scene, the story was that it was a Native American, a Wampanoag woman, who had jumped to her death, right? And so, then that's case, so that's that. So you push that aside. We found out that that Asonnet Ledge has only existed for less than 200 years.
Okay.
It was created by a company looking to get that granite.
Oh.
Right? So there's no way that a Wampanoag woman from 300-400 years ago committed suicide there or got killed there.
Right.
Because there was no there.
What was there before?
Well, it was just mountain.
It was just mountain. So
get what I'm saying?
Potentially she could have?
Potentially,
okay.
Right?
All right, okay. Let's go ahead.
But by the time I had heard the story, it had already been changed to, it was a dark woman who had been jilted by a lover, and so she committed suicide. So once again, I don't doubt that there is paranormal activity there, and I don't doubt that people see this dark-figured woman. But each culture's need for what it is imprinted on their telling of the story. And then, of course, if you're proven wrong, you just change it. You know what I'm saying? If if it happens that like, well, wait a minute, there's no way that could have happened because of this.
Then it has to be this.
Right, right, and it's kind of the way you tell a story, and you've got like the details of the story, and then someone says, well, wait a minute, why didn't they just open the door first? Mm-hmm. And it's not like you want to lie, but you just think logically, well, why wouldn't they have opened the door? Oh, just make that part of the story. And you kind of be like, oh, they didn't open the door because it was those child locks. Now, you don't know that they had the child locks on, but all of a sudden that then becomes part of the story. And the child locks were on, but the door is still open. And you don't mean to change the story. You don't mean to lie, but you want them to feel the core of what you're saying.
You want
and the
them
details
to feel
are
what
secondary.
you felt the first time that you heard it, so you try to make it more legitimate.
Exactly, which is why two things become five things. You're not
Right.
really trying to lie. You just want them to feel what you're trying to communicate to them. Like, you really want them to get the sense of what you're saying. Mm-hmm. And so you embellish the story, but those embellishments often become like part of the mythology of it, part of the background of it.
It's like that game Telephone.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Exactly. So
That's fun. It'll be fun to learn how to investigate that, and how to trip that, how to figure out the first person that did the telephone and go all the way to the last person that did it. You know what I mean?
yeah, I mean, Spooky South Coast years ago gave me the tag of analytical folklorist.
Ooh, I like it.
Because
AF.
it sounded really good. I don't
Yeah.
even think they were necessarily sure of what it meant. But I've kind of taken that and run with it, because
Absolutely.
like I do feel that is what I do, is like look at, well, how does this story, what does this tell us about, all literature is a representation of the life and times during which it was written. Mr. Stan Gorski, my high school English teacher, it's the same kind of thing. All legends, all folklore are a representation of the communities that invented them and the communities that continue to retell them.
It's fantastic. I have a whole new understanding of what we want to do. You know what I mean? It's so much deeper than I really thought it was.
Right. And it is about the moment, and it is about experiencing it. Mm-hmm. But for me, it's also about, if it is a story that has existed for a long time, how has that story changed and things like that.
Where did it begin and how did it change?
Right.
You know what I mean? Who added what? Who took away what? Absolutely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you can't track that. Like a good story, you can't track,
Yeah. Right. Like Georgie's probably been caught by now.
Get off, George. And so a good example of that could be the second feeler that we got back. The pants.
Super interesting.
Okay.
Can't wait to do this one.
So this is something that I think we can probably definitely do. Mm-hmm. I think we can probably definitely do. That's...
it's late, Chris. I'm not going to judge the way that you're speaking.
I know, but that's kind of the world that we're living in anyway, right? It is 100% maybe possibly true. So when I was writing Ghostly Adventures, which was like my first book, I put out all this like, hey, tell me your ghost story to all these different investigators, right? And the field was not necessarily as cluttered as it is now, or became. So I was able... Saturated? Okay.
Cluttered. That's mean.
I'm sorry, I'm obsessed with connotation this week. And one of the responses back I got was from a group of investigators in Florida. Mm-hmm. And she, Lori, who was the head of the group, told me the story of these haunted pants.
Pants.
And it sounded like a really good legend, because the way that she told it was, she began by telling me like how she doesn't like to tell people that she's a paranormal investigator. Now also keep in mind, this is like 10 years ago.
Okay.
Because we're going back to my first one. And she kind of opened the subject up with some guys who were, I'm trying to remember whether it was in a bar or whether it was in some kind of festival, but she was with kind of people whose guards were down.
Okay.
And she mentioned something about her being in the paranormal world and investigating the paranormal. To which a guy was like, "Oh, have you heard about the ghost pants?" And so
I mean, she had just recently moved to with the area that
at
she
that
was
point,
in,
yeah,
right?
it seemed like she hadn't been there a long time.
You just posted the article, so I read it as soon as you posted it.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, if you want to read the article and get like kind of more details on this as we're going in, you can definitely go to trippingonlegends.wordpress.com and look for the story of the pants. And so I think it's called Ghostly Pants, question mark. And he proceeded to tell her about how he had seen this pair of pants walking in this area. And so there was no body, there was no, all it was were these pants, right? And he went on to describe the pants.
Wait, time out.
Yes.
Do you know that there is a book by Dr. Seuss about just a pair of pants?
Is there really?
There really is. Like, it's a pair of glow-in-the-dark pants that travels around and people see it.
Okay, first of all, I'm getting goosebumps, but I always thought it was a Berenstain Bears story that involved the pants.
No, it's Dr. Seuss.
It's Dr.
Pants.
Seuss.
Hang on. I just actually read it not too long ago to my girls for Halloween.
All I know is that I had one of the most horrific dreams when I was a kid involving ghostly pants.
No, you're kidding.
And they're glow-in-the-dark pants.
Shut up. Maybe.
And it was always, I remember the scene, yes.
Okay, so for our listeners, I pulled up on my phone the Pale Green Pants by Dr. Seuss. What was in the pants? It's a pair of green pants that travels around Dr. Seuss's land, and they're slightly horrifying, and probably the source of Chris's dream.
But also maybe the source of this legend, right? So
quite possibly.
Yeah, I mean the dream was so horrific. And I didn't remember it until she told me that story. And I didn't remember it again until I revisited the story. Because I recently emailed her to kind of get some details. Don't even bring that picture up, please. It's not even funny. It's not even, I might cry.
Oh, okay. I'm putting the phone away.
So he was telling this story about the pants. And then someone kind of overheard them and said, oh, I know about those pants. And then he began to tell a story, kind of adding more of an element of everybody knows about those pants. Like people just have heard it, for a while. To which she, like absolutely loved hearing it. And then a short time later, she experienced the ghostly pants.
Right. I got goosebumps when I read that.
Right.
Yeah.
And so this seemed like a really good opportunity to, hey, wait a minute, I'm in Florida now. This is in Holiday, Florida. Mm-hmm. I'm in Florida now. Like, I can go get those pants.
Right, absolutely.
And so I contacted the writer, the woman, the investigator, and she was like, well, today I got a response from her, and she said pretty much like, I want to call you, I want to talk to you about it. I haven't experienced it again, and a lot of the people who I talked to are no longer with us.
Oh.
Right? Because it was 10 years from when she had told us. So we're talking like 20, 30 years
right.
from the initial contact.
Oh, wow.
But she had, so she was open to talking with us and hopefully recording her story.
Yeah.
So getting her story from it and then actually going out to the location where these pants are or were and seeing if we can experience them.
Maybe talking to some locals, maybe some... like the librarian, maybe from that community. That's a small town.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Maybe talking to other people and see if they've had any experiences or know of anybody that's had.
Right. And then once you get something like that, then it's also, sometimes you can also contact the papers that are in that area. Mm-hmm. They might have some handle on something. And so, our first... So now that so we've got that, boom, it's solid, like we're going to go do that. Mm-hmm. Now the next step is, are there any other references out there on the internet first of this?
Right.
And then we, like you said, start contacting the libraries and the people in that area to be like, and if there's any of the witnesses that she spoke to alive, like, can we talk to them? Can we?
Well, I'm pretty sure in the story that you wrote, she was with a kid that she was driving home because it was raining. And the kid had seen the pants too. And that wasn't his or her, I don't remember, first experience seeing them.
The kid.
The kid.
The kid had seen them multiple times.
Right. So maybe that kid, who's probably now an adult,
Yeah.
is still around in that area, and we can talk to them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, and that's kind of like how it's going to evolve. So this is kind of the initial point. It looks like this one is a definite trip, especially if we can get her to want to talk to us, you know, on camera or on tape at least, and will show us where she saw them. That seems like a really good one for us.
We should really post the picture, and I'll do it, so you don't have to be, you know, part of that. You don't have nightmares. I don't want to be the source of your bad dreams. We should post a picture of what Dr. Seuss's book looks like, so people can kind of get a visual of what pants without a body look like.
And I'm not just talking about my absolute dread at having to look at those pants again, but there are sometimes copyright laws, like you can't post like a picture that comes from a book.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's still I just ran into a letter that's probably maybe 2 years old now, but an email that basically was saying like Spooky South Coast owed like $3,000 for, because one of the people who was posting, was blogging for us, used a picture that had a copyright thing attached to it. So,
yeah, well,
you know,
okay.
although, you know, it's, I don't know. It's all, I guess if you're sued, it means that people are actually looking at you.
Yeah, right. There's no such thing as bad publicity. No.
Now, what I want you to tell is like, so then I mentioned Holiday, Florida, and
so then, you know, the research bug in me kicked in because it was a really interesting article that Chris had posted. So immediately I went online to try and find more information, you know, just initial, see if anything's up there about it, see if anybody else has been to research this. I couldn't find anything, but what I did find was that in a neighboring town called Tarpon Springs, there's a little tiny store. It's called Get a Guru, and they make handmade soaps and things of that nature, olive oil, things like that. And they have a vortex wall. There have been occurrences where a woman has appeared out of thin air from this wall. This, I found out by doing some research, that this little building has been in this family since 1934 in this small little town in Florida. I mean, Tarpon Springs is not a big town. And it was passed down from this grandmother to this granddaughter, who changed the name to Get a Guru. And there's
what was it originally called?
Seahorse, something Seahorse.
Yeah, Seahorse by the Sea or
something of that
like that
nature.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't have it right in front of me.
Because it's called both things. It's good. The
Right.
business is called both.
It's called both things, yeah. But of Greek descent.
By the way, I didn't even realize that it was pronounced Get a Guru
Oh, really?
from the way it was spelled until you just said it.
Yep, it's Get a Guru.
All right, so which
There's
makes
a
a lot
Facebook
more
page.
sense.
Looks like cool soaps, actually. But it's a Greek descendant, first generation Greek descendant. So this woman had owned it, the grandmother, first generation, so had come over here, and then obviously had passed it down to her granddaughter, who's continuing this family business. So the same family has been in this building where there have been just strange occurrences. I've read that other paranormal investigators have been there and have tested things with like a magnet and how the magnet is moves funny or whatever against this one wall. So I thought that was pretty cool. But no other real references to it.
Right.
But I thought for sure something to definitely check into. If nothing else, buy myself a nice soap.
And what did you think of the attached story that I pointed out to you? Because I think you then went on Haunted Places for this, and there was a comment in the section. There was in the comment section.
There was a comment.
There was a thing. What did you think about that?
A little whacked out. So there was this comment about, this is where I found it, was like hauntedplaces.org or haunted places in Florida, something along those lines.
I think it's hauntedplaces.org.
It was where I found the initial, like, hey, they have a vortex wall, and then I went from there. And then on this site was a woman, what was her name? Darina?
Yeah.
Darina, something along those lines, where she's like, I'm a psychic. This story is actually about...
Her spirit guide gave her the
Her
story.
spirit guide gave her the story. Do you want me to read it?
Sure, if you can.
Okay, I can find it real quick. I still have it pulled up.
So while
take
she's
from
pulling it
here.
up, I then did some research on this woman.
wow, you didn't tell
And
me
it
that.
seems, yes,
Oh,
it seems as if she is, she's a psychic. She seems to be out of South Carolina. So I want to know how someone from South Carolina has done this.
even new, and even
Right.
how they found
So I
that.
was able to find her posting on several different sites,
Okay.
as well as her Facebook page. I was able to find,
Wow.
and
Wait, hang on, back up. The
yeah,
posting on other sites that you've seen, was it similar in nature?
no, it was not. But there was a similar theme to some of her other posts,
Okay.
which seems to be. Um, seems to point
Oh, wow.
to her might not being stable emotionally. I know it's really hard to say. I don't know this woman, but several of the things that I was able to find related to her
Okay.
had to do with her thinking that she was being psychically attacked,
Ooh.
with
Which I don't.
her spirit guides trying to get her to commit suicide was
Ooh.
one of them.
Yikes.
So those are, and people were like, I've never heard of that. Your spirit guides are protectors, they're helpers,
Right.
they're.
Yeah. Exactly.
So this seems like someone who, whether it's, you know, overactive imagination or something clinical, or whether she has just been a target of some kind of paranormal attacks, she seems to
Well,
have that
and we
history
know
behind
there's
her.
that dark side in the paranormal where
We
she
do.
might be confused as to what she's
No,
experiencing.
I'm with you, and that's what she was kind of
Right.
asking, was like, does this seem normal? That do other people have this?
Mm.
Their spirit guides do this kind of thing, and everyone was like, no, that's not normal. So
Okay, so I did find it. I found
okay,
the post. The site is hauntedplaces.org, so you were correct there. I'm just going to read it. I'm actually going to read the first comment. It was from 2 years ago in August. An anonymous person had said that they always felt weird at the store by the front window. They were told that someone was killed in front of this window. They
so
don't
that
know
would
if
be
it's
on the street.
right on the street. They don't know if it's true, but ask the owner. So the second comment is from Dorina, and that's actually really recent. It's from July of 16.
Yes, that's the thing that impressed me, was that it was from July.
So you take this post that was from probably 2013, I want to say, is when I think I found
Okay,
the
I
date.
want to say the first comment was from 2012.
Was it?
So I think it might,
Okay.
the posting might even be before then.
Okay. I'll have to verify that, but let me just read what her initial post was. So Dorina states that this haunting is actually a private prediction for two people who are destined to meet again in Tarpon Springs after a 90-year separation. The man was a real guru in a past life. She has in parentheses, get a guru. The vortex, in parentheses, a cycle of spiritual vibrations, foretells of the woman cycling into a new life, which begins in Tarpon Springs with the reunion of two lovers. She then further states if you look at the photos for Get a Guru on Google, you'll see a 777 on the front door, where people have strongly felt psychic vibrations. 7 is the commonly accepted number for good fortune. 3 is the personal lucky number of these two. Of these two lovers fated to meet again at the Sponge Docks. Hence, there are really 3 sevens on the door. Another photo shows soaps covered with rose petals, and a rose is a symbolic name for this woman. Another photo shows a little cigar stand to the left of the shop. Look closely and you'll see the word dreams on a sign hanging from the table. The rest of the words are blurred, symbolizing that dreams are manifesting into reality. This is a prediction of unusual complexity. It obviously took a long time to formulate all of these different components, to have this location given the address of 777, to have the owners rename it Get a Guru, to have the cigar stand next to the store inspired to write this sign, to have the store owner inspired to photograph soaps covered in rose petals. This is a prediction of not some insignificant event. I am a psychic, and this is an interpretation was given to me by spirits who created this prediction. It was desired by them to have a physically manifested prediction of what is to occur in the very close future, the reunion between this former guru and his dark rose. And that is the rest of it. And then she reposted the same thing.
Could you tell what was different in the second story?
I'm not.
I've read through them a few times and I can't really figure out what's different.
I think that she just wanted to get their attention.
Ah,
Do you know what I mean? I think she just wanted to get whoever the editor or whoever the content director is for hauntedplaces.org. I think she just wanted to get them to put that up there. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Not so much in the comments section, but more so attached to the Vortex story.
Okay.
That was
I got
my
the
take on
impression that she went back and edited it, but she couldn't take it down, and she might have added something, but I couldn't find what she added.
it. So yes, I do actually. Just really quick, I just saw it. Crazily enough, in the third paragraph, it says the sevens, the 3 sevens on the door represents passage into a charmed life. So, obviously, there's a negative comment on there, and
Right.
they kind of point out that the actual address of the building is 777, whatever the name.
Well, I
of the
mean, but
street is,
even that because I read that comment too, and I was like, well, that doesn't mean anything. Like, the fact that it's there is the sign. The
Right.
fact that it's actually at 777 is the sign.
It would be interesting to find out if it was at one time a different street number and address, because she
right.
mentions in that her prediction that it was changed to that address. You know what I mean?
So this is something that seems like it could be good follow-up material as well,
Absolutely.
because you can get some soap.
And
We can talk to
potentially
the
olive
owner.
oil, cigars.
Cigars. We can definitely talk to the owners of that shop.
Mm-hmm.
I want to contact
Alani.
Alani. No,
Alani.
Dorai.
Oh, Dorina. You want to
Dorina.
contact Dorina.
I want to contact.
That's all you.
I know we're kind of on two different paths with this. So
yeah, I want to talk to the owner, Alani,
Mm-hmm.
who got the store passed down to her from her grandmother. I've already looked her up on Facebook. I've stalked her a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, so I've got her. You can talk to the other one.
The other one.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that might be a really interesting idea to bring to it, is the two different aspects or the two different approaches we're going to take
Absolutely.
to kind of get like the full picture of this.
Mm-hmm.
Because I guess I'm kind of used to talking to the people who sometimes don't make sense or who sometimes are on the fringe. I hate to be diminutive about anything that she's doing. Like it's more of a fringe kind of idea or thought, but it's like, well, if you believe in one aspect of the paranormal, you have to kind of be open to other ones
To
too.
the rest of it,
And you know
absolutely.
me, I'm a big believer in signs. And I'm a big believer in, like, wait a minute, why am I constantly seeing this number or these things? So I actually kind of, I think she might be attaching some things to it. And I'm really skeptical about the spirit guide aspect of it, that the spirit guide gave this to her. But that's my own.
But it's not.
That's my own
unheard of.
block?
Look
No,
at
well-
Sylvia Brown. You know what I mean? Just like it's not unheard of.
No, it's not. It's just something that's not necessarily in my belief system.
I'm not opposed to contacting Dorina. I just wouldn't know how to approach her. So that's all you. Like you said,
yeah,
you're
I'm
used
gonna
to
do it.
that. I'm not, but I completely believe in signs. I think that was definitely fated that we saw that. I mean, I stumbled upon that
Right.
post. You know
Right,
what I
right.
mean? It so happened to be very close to the pants story.
So I
and really
think
grabbed
that
my attention.
And I think that contacting Lori might have other benefits to it, because she is someone who is familiar with the paranormal in that area. So she might be able to connect us to either another story, which is how this works, right? One story
Right.
feeds the next story, which
Exactly.
feeds
Yeah,
the next story. And then, hopefully when we post that stuff, people will start to be like, oh, well, that's something similar to what I've experienced over here. Or
Right.
I was at that place, and they want to do a follow-up. And that's kind of how, hopefully, the momentum of this works.
So, a question for you as we wrap this up. If our listeners want to offer up a story that they've heard in their area, how do they get a hold of us?
Well, the best thing would be to go to
Facebook?
Tripping on Legends.
Okay.
.wordpress.com, and you can leave a comment.
Okay.
The other thing you can do is you can email spookytripping@gmail.com.
Now, is that tripping or trippin'?
Tripping with the ing.
Got it.
Tripping on Legends. I'm sorry, spookytripping@gmail.com. Or even if you send it to spookycrew@spookysouthcoast.com, that's the email that gets to me.
Right.
And so, like, I think we're both encouraging people. You can comment on the YouTube, you can comment on the Facebook page.
Absolutely. Let us know.
Like, so that we're,
yeah.
And right now, because everything is kind of new, there's not really a lot of brand name stuff out,
Right.
you know? And so it is literally like going to Facebook and typing on Tripping on Legends to find the page.
Right, exactly.
At this point. Or
Absolutely.
it's going to YouTube and typing it. I remember my first website was called, this was it was called Massachusetts Ghosts and Legends, right? Before it became Mass Crossroads. But the address of it was www.chrisandjenna441 at yahoo.com /geocities / Massachusetts Ghosts and Legends.
Jeez.
Right. So we're kind of at that stage where, but instead of that, it's just numbers and random numbers and
For the
and-
YouTube,
right?
too,
For the
right.
accounts. So at this point, it's going to involve you guys doing a little bit of Google, or at least a little searching when you get into those things. But we're definitely open to getting your thoughts not only on what we're doing here, but also specifically on like something you think might be worth us tripping on.
For sure. For sure. You know, we don't have a concrete plan. We're looking for different things that pop up that are interesting that nobody else is really looking at is really what we're going for too.
And I think going into it with that approach is going to leave us open to things that
I think
we
so,
might
too.
have. Like, I never would have been like, yes, let's go look for a lake monster.
Right. Right.
Like, that definitely would have been. I've been offered before. People have been like, hey, let's go look for a skunk ape. Do you want to look for a skunk ape? Or do you want to be attached to this project that we're coming down there to look for skunk ape? And I'm like, no, but us being open minded in this project is going to maybe leave us open to some of those things.
It will, for sure. The word vortex just manifests just this spooky, maybe not spooky, but just mysterious image.
Well, I would be
you know?
interested in knowing, I know we're wrapping up here.
I know.
But
Sorry.
I would be interested in knowing when that initial post and when the word vortex kind of came into use in relation to this site.
Well,
Because vortexes are very hot right now in the paranormal world.
oh, really? So the article that I found, deeply buried on the internet, was from 2001.
So that's kind of, when vortexes were not like the hip thing in the paranormal. So
Right.
it's interesting they would choose that.
Right. Absolutely. So kind of offers the legitimacy of
Yeah.
what is there.
Yeah, and this is interesting because, I know that of several other production companies that are looking maybe for someplace like this, if this is interesting. So it'll be interesting to go in.
We'll see. All right, I think that wraps up episode 2. We've been talking for way too long. I'm Natalie Christ.
And I'm Chris Balzano saying, till next time, keep your mind open and the path clear so that you can decide what you get to trip on.